Jonas Walker never expected to find 7 children dying in the rain that night, or the collapsed woman behind them who would turn his world upside down. What started as a simple act of mercy became a battle between duty and desire, between a ghost from the past and a future he never thought possible. This is a story of survival, second chances, and the kind of love that's forged in fire. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The rain came down like God's own fury that November night, cold and merciless across the Texas plains. It wasn't the gentle kind of rain that farmers prayed for. It was the kind that drowned hope, turned roads into rivers of mud, and made a man question whether the world had any kindness left in it at all. Jonas Walker pulled his coat tighter as he rode through the darkness, his horse's hooves splashing through puddles that seemed to have no bottom. He'd been riding since dawn, coming back from town with supplies that wouldn't last him through the winter but would have to do. At 42 years old, Jonas had learned to make do with less. Much less. His cabin sat another 3 miles north, and all he wanted was to get there, light a fire, and forget the world existed for another few days. But then he heard it. At first he thought it was an animal, a wounded coyote maybe, or a cow separated from its herd. But as he turned his horse toward the sound, squinting through the sheets of rain, he realized it was crying, human crying. A child's voice, high and desperate, cutting through the storm like a knife through butter. "Help! Someone please help us!" Jonas's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He spurred his horse forward, and that's when he saw them, huddled together beneath a scraggly oak tree that offered about as much shelter as a politician's promise. 7 children, ranging from what looked like maybe 14 years down to a tiny thing that couldn't have been more than 3. They were soaked through, shivering so hard their teeth chattered loud enough to hear over the rain. The oldest girl, thin as a rail with dark hair plastered to her face, stood in front of the others like a mama bear protecting her cubs. Her eyes were wide with fear and something else. Determination, maybe. Or desperation. Probably both. "Please," she called out as Jonas dismounted. "Please, sir, our mama—" She pointed with a trembling hand, and Jonas turned to look. About 20 yards away, barely visible through the rain, he could make out the dark shape of a covered wagon tilted at a sickening angle, its front wheel buried hub deep in the mud. And there, face down in the muck between the wagon and the tree, was a woman's body, completely still. Jonas didn't think. He just moved. He ran through the mud, his boots making obscene sucking sounds with each step, and dropped to his knees beside the woman. He turned her over as gently as he could, and in the flashes of lightning, he got his first look at Martha Allen, though he didn't know her name yet. She was probably in her early 30s, with a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't gray as ash and streaked with mud. Her lips had a bluish tint that made Jonas's stomach drop. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse, and for a terrible moment, he thought he was too late. Then he felt it, weak and thready, but there. She was alive, barely. Is she dead? The oldest girl had followed him, the 6 other children trailing behind her like ducklings. "Please, mister, tell me she ain't dead." "She's alive," Jonas said, hooking his arms under the woman's shoulders. "But she won't be for long if we don't get her warm. How long has she been like this?" "I don't know. An hour, maybe? The wagon broke and Mama was trying to fix it, but then she just fell down." Jonas lifted Martha into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, all bones and exhaustion. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel her shallow breathing against his neck. "My cabin's about 3 miles north," he said, looking at the oldest girl. "You think you and your brothers and sisters can walk that far?" "We'll crawl if we have to," she said, and Jonas believed her. "What's your name, girl?" Clara Allen. "These are my brothers and sisters, Thomas, Sarah, Rebecca, Matthew, Elizabeth, and that's little Emma." She pointed to each child in turn, and Jonas tried to commit the names to memory, though in the chaos of the storm, they mostly just became a blur of frightened faces. "All right, Clara, I'm Jonas Walker. I need you to be strong right now, you hear me? Your mama needs you to be strong." Clara nodded, though her chin was trembling. "Yes, sir." Jonas whistled for his horse, which came trotting over, looking about as happy with the situation as Jonas felt. He couldn't carry Martha and lead all 7 children on horseback. The horse would never manage it, especially in this mud. So he made a decision that he'd probably regret when his back started screaming at him tomorrow. He'd walk. Clara, you take little Emma and put her on the horse. The rest of you stay close to me. Don't wander off. Don't fall behind. If you do, I might not be able to find you again in this storm. Understood? 7 pairs of eyes stared at him through the rain, and 7 heads nodded. Good. Let's move. The walk back to Jonas's cabin was 3 miles of pure hell. The wind picked up, driving the rain into their faces like tiny frozen needles. The mud tried to claim Jonas's boots with every step, and Martha's weight, slight as it was, grew heavier with each passing minute. His arms burned. His back screamed. But he didn't stop. Behind him he could hear the children struggling. Thomas, who looked to be about 12, was helping young Matthew, who was crying softly. Sarah and Rebecca held hands, stumbling through the darkness. Clara walked beside the horse, one hand on little Emma to keep her steady, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. Is she still breathing? Clara called out every few minutes, and every time Jonas would check and call back, Yes. But he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep saying yes. Martha's breathing was getting shallower, her skin colder. She needed warmth, needed it fast, and 3 miles in a storm might as well be 300. Tell me about your family, Jonas said to Clara, partly to distract her and partly to keep himself going. Where were you headed? West, Clara said, her voice barely audible over the wind. Mama said there was land out west where we could start over. Said we could have our own farm maybe, somewhere that wasn't all used up and worn out. Your daddy? Clara's face tightened. Dead. Died last spring. Worked himself to death on land that wouldn't grow nothing but rocks and regret, Mama said. Jonas nodded. He knew that story. Hell, he'd lived that story, or one pretty damn close to it. Mama tried to keep the farm going, Clara continued, but the bank wanted money we didn't have. So we sold everything we couldn't fit in the wagon and headed out. That was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks on the road with 7 children and no man to help. Jonas felt a reluctant admiration for the woman in his arms. She had spine, he'd give her that. We're almost there, he lied. They were maybe halfway, but the children needed hope more than they needed truth right now. The storm intensified, if such a thing was possible. Thunder cracked so loud it felt like the sky was splitting open, and lightning turned the world white for brief, blinding moments. Little Emma started crying on the horse, and Clara tried to soothe her with a song that Jonas could barely hear. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Her voice cracked on the words, but she kept singing anyway, and something about that, about this terrified girl trying to comfort her baby sister while their mother lay dying in a stranger's arms, made Jonas's throat tight. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. He'd lost his own wife 8 years ago, lost her and the baby she was carrying, both gone in one terrible night of blood and screaming and prayers that went unanswered. He'd buried them in the spring when the ground finally thawed, and then he'd buried himself too, in a way. Buried himself in work and silence, and the kind of solitude that slowly turns a man into a ghost of himself. This cabin he was taking them to, it had been his and Caroline's dream once, a place to raise children, to build a life. Now it was just 4 walls and a roof, a place to exist rather than live. And if that mockingbird don't sing, but there was something about the weight of this woman in his arms, about the sound of 7 children's footsteps behind him, about Clara's broken lullaby floating through the storm, something that reached down into that buried part of him and gave it a shake. There! Jonas called out as another flash of lightning illuminated the landscape. See that light? That's home! It wasn't much, just a small cabin with a covered porch and a barn that was more lean than structure, but to the children it must have looked like a palace. They actually started moving faster, and Jonas had to tell them to slow down before someone twisted an ankle in the dark. He kicked open the door. Not locked, never locked. What was the point when you lived this far from anywhere, and was hit with a blast of cold, stale air? The cabin was dark and smelled of old smoke and loneliness. Clara, there's matches on the mantel. Get the fire going. The rest of you stay put until I can get some light in here. He carried Martha to his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin, and laid her down as gently as he could. Even in the darkness, he could tell she was in bad shape. Her breathing was raspy now, and her skin was cold as clay. Behind him, Clara struck a match, and warm light bloomed in the fireplace. She'd clearly done this before. She had kindling arranged and a flame going within minutes. The other children huddled around the fireplace like moths around a lamp, their hands stretched toward the warmth. Jonas grabbed every blanket he owned, which wasn't many, and piled them on top of Martha. Then he knelt beside the bed and started unlacing her boots, which were caked with so much mud they probably weighed 5 pounds each. "Clara, I need you to help me," he said. "Your mama's clothes are soaked through. We need to get her into something dry or she's going to catch pneumonia, if she hasn't already." Clara's eyes went wide. Yes, sir." Between the two of them, they managed to get Martha out of her wet dress and into one of Jonas's old shirts, which hung on her like a tent. It wasn't modest and it wasn't proper, but it was dry, and right now that was all that mattered. They piled the blankets back on top of her, and Jonas added his own coat to the pile for good measure. "Will she be all right?" Clara whispered, staring at her mother's pale face. Jonas wanted to say yes. He wanted to tell this brave girl that everything would be fine, that her mother would wake up in the morning good as new, but he'd learned a long time ago that pretty lies were more cruel than ugly truths. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but she's breathing and she's out of the rain. That's something." Clara nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you for helping us. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Jonas said, and he meant it. He stood up and looked at the 6 other children still clustered around the fireplace. They were all staring at him with a mixture of hope and fear, waiting to see what would happen next. The youngest one, Emma, he reminded himself, was sucking her thumb and looked about 2 seconds away from falling asleep where she stood. "All right," Jonas said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "First things first. You all need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. I don't have much in the way of children's clothing, but I've got some old shirts and such that'll do for tonight." He rummaged through his chest and pulled out every piece of spare clothing he owned. Old work shirts, a few pairs of long underwear that had seen better days, some socks with holes in them. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and right now, dry was worth more than gold. While the children changed behind a blanket Clara strung up for privacy, Jonas assessed his supplies. He had maybe 2 weeks' worth of food for one man, which meant he had about 2 days' worth of food for 9 people. He had a ham hanging in the cellar that he'd been saving for Christmas, some cornmeal, a bag of beans, and a few precious jars of preserved vegetables from last summer. It would have to be enough. By the time the children emerged from behind the blanket, looking like a ragtag army of scarecrows in their oversized clothing, Jonas had a pot of water boiling over the fire and was dumping in beans and cornmeal to make a kind of porridge. "It ain't much," he said, "but it's hot, and it'll fill your bellies." The children fell on the food like wolves, and Jonas realized they probably hadn't eaten a decent meal in days, maybe weeks. He watched them eat, these 7 souls who dropped into his life like stones into a still pond, sending ripples through his carefully maintained solitude. Martha Allen hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. Her breathing was still shallow, still raspy, and her face was still gray. Jonas knelt beside the bed and pressed his hand to her forehead. She was cold, too cold. He needed to warm her up, needed to get her core temperature back to normal, but how? The answer came to him, uncomfortable as it was. Body heat. It was the fastest way to warm someone suffering from exposure. "Clara," he called softly. The girl came over immediately, her eyes questioning. "I need you to lie down next to your mama, help warm her up. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." Clara climbed onto the bed without hesitation and pressed close to her mother, wrapping her thin arms around her. "She's so cold." "I know, but you're going to help warm her, you and your brothers and sisters." One by one, he had the children climb onto the bed, arranging them around and on top of their mother like a blanket of small bodies. It was crowded and awkward, but within minutes he could see color starting to return to Martha's face. Jonas pulled his only chair over beside the bed and sat down, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. His arms ached from carrying Martha, his back was one solid knot of pain, and his wet clothes were starting to make him shiver. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. Not until he was sure she was going to make it through the night. "Mr. Jonas?" It was Thomas, the 12-year-old, looking at him with solemn eyes. "Are you going to send us away?" "What?" "In the morning. Are you going to send us away? I know we're a burden. Mama always said we shouldn't be a burden to nobody." Jonas looked at this boy who was trying so hard to be a man, trying to protect his family, even though he was just a child himself. He thought about the easy answer, the safe answer. He could say yes, tell them they'd have to move on as soon as Martha was well enough to travel, keep his distance, keep his life simple and uncomplicated. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. "No," Jonas said. "No, son, I'm not going to send you away. Not until your mama's well and you've got somewhere safe to go. You hear me?" Thomas's face crumpled with relief, and he nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Jonas stood up and added more wood to the fire, then hung the children's wet clothes on a line he strung across the room. The cabin was filling with steam and smoke and the smell of drying wool, but it was warm now, blessedly warm. He looked around at his cabin, his sanctuary, his isolation chamber, his self-imposed prison. The floor was covered with muddy footprints. The bed was full of sleeping children. The air was loud with breathing and snoring and the occasional whimper from someone having a bad dream. It was chaos. It was mess. It was the most alive his cabin had felt in 8 years. Jonas sank back into his chair and watched Martha Allen's chest rise and fall, rise and fall. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, 7 children slept safe and warm, curled around their mother like petals around the center of a flower. "Don't you die on them," Jonas whispered to the unconscious woman. "Don't you dare die on them. They need you." And then, so quietly, he almost didn't hear himself say it. "And maybe I need you too." The fire crackled, the rain hammered on the roof. And Jonas Walker, who had spent 8 years learning how to be alone, suddenly found himself surrounded by life. He didn't sleep that night. Every hour he checked Martha's breathing, felt her forehead, adjusted the blankets. Gradually, her color improved. Her breathing deepened. Her skin grew warmer. By the time the first gray light of dawn started seeping through the window, Jonas allowed himself to believe she might actually survive. Clara woke first, her eyes flying open and immediately seeking her mother's face. "She's still with us," Jonas said softly, and Clara's whole body sagged with relief. One by one, the other children woke, blinking in the dim light, confused about where they were until memory returned. Martha Allen remained unconscious, but her breathing was steady now, and the terrible gray pallor had left her face. Jonas made more of the cornmeal porridge, this time adding some precious salt and a bit of the preserved ham. The children ate quietly, stealing glances at their mother, at Jonas, at the strange cabin that had become their refuge. "What happens now?" Clara asked, and it was a fair question. Jonas looked at these 7 children, at their mother lying unconscious in his bed, at the chaos they'd brought into his carefully ordered solitude. He thought about his plans, simple plans, quiet plans, plans that involved no one but himself. And then he thought about Martha Allen collapsing in the mud, about 7 children shivering in the rain, about how easily they all could have died if he'd taken a different road home, if he'd been an hour later, if he'd decided to ignore that cry for help. "Now," Jonas said, looking at Clara's brave, frightened face. "Now we wait for your mama to wake up. And while we wait, we survive. Together." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. But looking at those 7 pairs of eyes watching him with fragile hope, Jonas Walker knew he was going to try. The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin something else was beginning, something that had nothing to do with rain or thunder or the howling wind. Something that would change everything for all of them. If only they'd known then what was coming, what would test them, what would try to tear them apart, what would force each of them to choose between the past they knew and the future they feared. But that morning, in the gray light of dawn, with 7 children fed and warm and their mother breathing steady, Jonas allowed himself to hope. Just a little. Just enough. And somewhere deep in her unconscious mind, Martha Allen heard her children's voices and fought to swim back toward them, back toward the light, back toward the stranger who had saved them all. Martha Allen's eyes opened 3 hours after dawn, and the first thing she saw was the rough-hewn beams of an unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, trying to piece together where she was and how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was the wagon wheel sinking deeper into the mud, the rain coming down in sheets, and the terrible realization that she couldn't fix it alone. She remembered trying to unhitch the horse, her hands slipping on the wet leather, her vision swimming, and then nothing. "Mama?" Clara's face appeared above her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mama, you're awake! Oh, thank God, you're awake!" "Clara." Martha's voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat raw. "Where—" "You're safe, Mama. We're all safe. This man, Mr. Jonas, he found us in the storm. He brought us here." Martha turned her head and saw a stranger standing by the fireplace, a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that held shadows of old pain. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something else. Wariness, maybe. "My children," Martha said, trying to sit up. The room spun violently, and she fell back against the pillow with a gasp. "Easy now," Jonas said, moving closer but keeping his distance. "You've been unconscious for near about 12 hours. Your body needs rest." "My children," Martha repeated, more insistent this time. "They're all here, all 7 of them, safe and fed." Jonas gestured around the cabin, and Martha's eyes followed. Thomas was sitting at a rough-hewn table, whittling something with a knife that looked too big for his hands. Sarah and Rebecca were playing some kind of hand game by the fire, their giggles soft and musical. Matthew was asleep on a pallet of blankets, and little Emma was curled up next to him, thumb in her mouth. Elizabeth sat in the corner, carefully mending what looked like one of her dresses. They were all there, all alive, all safe. The relief that washed over Martha was so powerful it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at the stranger who had saved them. "Thank you, Mr. Jonas Walker, and you don't need to thank me. Any decent man would have done the same." Martha studied his face and saw that he believed what he was saying, which told her everything she needed to know about him. In her experience, truly decent men never thought of themselves as anything special. "How do you feel?" Clara asked, pressing a cool cloth to Martha's forehead. "Mr. Jonas said you might have caught pneumonia." "I feel like I was trampled by a horse," Martha admitted. "But I'm alive and my babies are safe. That's all that matters." "You need to eat something," Jonas said, already moving toward the fireplace where a pot was simmering. "Been keeping some broth warm for when you woke. Nothing fancy, just ham bone and some vegetables, but it'll help get your strength back." He ladled the broth into a tin cup and brought it over, then seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether he should hand it to her or to Clara. Martha solved the problem by reaching for it herself, though her hands shook so badly that Jonas had to steady the cup. "I can help you," Clara said quickly. "No." Martha's voice was firmer now. "I can manage." It was important somehow that she feed herself. Important that this stranger see she wasn't completely helpless, that she was a woman who could take care of herself and her family, even if right now that was clearly a lie. The broth was hot and salty, and possibly the best thing Martha had ever tasted. She drank it slowly, feeling warmth spread through her chest and belly, chasing away some of the bone-deep cold that had settled into her. "The wagon," she said suddenly, looking at Jonas. "Our wagon, is it—" "Still where it was, I'd imagine, buried in the mud with a broken axle." Jonas pulled up a chair and sat down, keeping a respectful distance from the bed. "Storm's past now, but that road's going to be a mess for days. Nothing's going anywhere for a while." Martha closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. The wagon held everything they owned, what little that was. Their clothes, their few possessions, the seed they'd hoped to plant when they found land out west. And now it was just sitting there in the mud, probably being picked over by scavengers or ruined by the weather. "We'll get it," Jonas said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "When you're well enough, we'll go back with my horse and see what we can salvage. But that's not something to worry about today." "Everything I own is in that wagon." Martha's voice cracked despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "And everything you need is right here in this cabin. Your children, alive and warm. That's worth more than all the possessions in the world, Mrs. Allen." Martha opened her eyes and looked at him. "You know my name. Clara told me. Told me you were headed west, told me about your husband passing. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Martha set the empty cup down on the table beside the bed. Mr. Walker, I need to know, how long can we stay? I know we're an imposition, and I promise as soon as I'm strong enough, we'll be on our way. I just need a day or two to get my strength back, and then nothing, Jonas interrupted. You're not going anywhere until you're fully recovered and until we can figure out what to do about that wagon. Could be a week, could be two, however long it takes. I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm telling. Jonas stood up, and Martha saw the set of his jaw, the determination in his eyes. You've got 7 children depending on you, Mrs. Allen. You can't take care of them if you're dead. So you're going to stay here, you're going to rest, and you're going to get well. Understood? Martha wanted to argue. Pride demanded that she argue, but her body was already pulling her back toward sleep, and she was wise enough to know when she was beaten. Understood, she whispered. Jonas nodded once, then turned to Clara. Your mama needs to sleep. Keep the little ones quiet if you can. Over the next 3 days, Martha drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting off fever and exhaustion in equal measure. When she was awake, she was aware of Jonas moving around the cabin, always busy, always working. She heard him giving quiet instructions to the children, heard the sound of wood being chopped, heard the crackle of the fire, and the murmur of young voices. Clara rarely left her side, and when Martha was lucid enough to notice, she realized her daughter had taken on the role of nurse with a competence that was both impressive and heartbreaking. A 14-year-old girl shouldn't have to know how to care for a sick mother, shouldn't have to carry that kind of responsibility. But Clara did it without complaint, bathing Martha's face with cool water when the fever spiked, helping her drink broth and water, changing the blankets when they became soaked with sweat. You're so strong, Martha whispered to her daughter during one of her more lucid moments. When did you get so strong? I learned from you, Mama, Clara said simply, and Martha had to look away before her daughter could see the tears. On the 4th day, Martha woke feeling truly awake for the first time. The fog in her head had cleared, and though she was weak as a newborn kitten, she could think clearly. She could hear voices outside the cabin, Jonas's deep rumble and the higher pitches of her children responding. She sat up slowly, testing her strength, and was relieved when the room didn't spin. Her legs trembled when she swung them over the side of the bed, but they held her weight. She stood, gripping the bedpost for support, and made her way to the window. Outside, Jonas was teaching Thomas how to split wood. Her son was struggling with the axe, which was clearly too heavy for him, but Jonas was patient, showing him how to let the weight of the tool do the work, how to aim for the cracks in the wood. Sarah and Rebecca were hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 trees, their dresses, clean now, flapping in the breeze. Matthew and Elizabeth were playing some kind of game with sticks, and little Emma was toddling after them, laughing. They looked happy. Fed and clean and safe and happy. Martha's throat tightened. How long had it been since she'd seen her children look like that? Not since before Jacob died, certainly. Probably not since before he got sick. For the past year, they'd all been just surviving, just getting through each day. But here, in this stranger's cabin, they were children again. The door opened, and Clara came in with an armful of firewood. She stopped when she saw Martha standing by the window. Mama, you shouldn't be up. You need to rest. I've been resting for 4 days. Martha turned from the window, keeping one hand on the wall for balance. I need to start being useful again. Mr. Jonas says you're not to lift a finger until you're fully recovered. Mr. Jonas isn't my keeper. But Martha said it gently, with no heat. Though I'm grateful for his care of all of us. Clara set the wood down by the fireplace and came to her mother, taking her arm. He's a good man, Mama. Lonely, I think, but good. He doesn't talk much about himself, but I can tell he's carrying some kind of hurt. Martha looked at her daughter with surprise. When had Clara become so perceptive? When had she learned to read people that way? This was his wife's dress, Clara continued, touching the fabric of the simple cotton dress Martha was wearing. He didn't say so, but I saw the way he looked at it when he gave it to me to help you into, like it hurt him to see it again. His wife. Dead, I think. There are no women's things here except for a few dresses in that trunk by the wall, and there's a marker out past the barn. I saw it when I was gathering eggs this morning. 2 markers, actually, one big and one small. His wife and child, then. Martha's heart ached for him. She knew what it was to lose a spouse, but to lose a child too? She couldn't imagine surviving that kind of grief. The door opened again, and Jonas came in, followed by Thomas, who was red-faced and sweating but grinning with pride. "Split a whole cord of wood," Thomas announced. "Mr. Jonas says I'm a natural." I said you're getting better," Jonas corrected, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. Then he saw Martha standing by the window, and the smile faded. "You shouldn't be up." "So I've been told." Martha lifted her chin. "But I'm feeling much better, and I need to start earning my keep." "You don't need to earn anything. You're a guest here." "A guest who's been imposing on your hospitality for 4 days now." Martha moved carefully toward the table, still using the wall for support. "I'm not an invalid, Mr. Walker, and I'm not comfortable being a burden." Jonas's jaw tightened. "You're not a burden? 7 children and a sick woman taking over your cabin? I'd say that's the very definition of a burden." They stared at each other across the small cabin, and Martha saw something flicker in Jonas's eyes. Irritation, maybe, or frustration, but underneath that something else, something that looked almost like longing. "Fine," he said finally. "You want to help? You can peel potatoes for supper, but you do it sitting down, and if you start feeling poorly, you go right back to bed. Deal?" "Deal." Jonas brought her a bucket of potatoes and a knife, then pulled out a chair for her at the table. Martha sat, grateful to be off her feet, and started peeling. Her hands were clumsy at first, weak from days of inactivity, but the familiar motion came back to her quickly. The cabin fell into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas went back outside to practice his wood splitting. Clara started preparing the evening meal, moving around the small kitchen area with efficiency. The younger children came in and out, bringing news of found bird nests and interesting rocks, and all the small dramas of childhood. And Jonas sat across from Martha, cleaning his rifle and occasionally glancing up at her, as if checking to make sure she was really all right. "How long have you lived here?" Martha asked, breaking the silence. 8 years. Built the cabin myself, mostly. Had some help with the heavy lifting, but did most of the work alone. It's a good cabin. Solid. It keeps the rain out, mostly. Jonas ran an oiled cloth along the barrel of the rifle. Was supposed to be bigger, had plans for a second room, a real kitchen, maybe a loft for children, but then he stopped, his hands going still on the rifle. "But then life had other plans," Martha finished softly. Jonas nodded, not looking at her. "Caroline, my wife, she died before we could finish. Her and the baby both. Died right there in that bed where you've been sleeping." Martha's hand stilled on the potato she was peeling. "I'm so sorry. Clara told me about the markers." "Did she now?" Jonas's voice was neutral, but Martha could hear the tension underneath. "She's observant, my Clara, too observant sometimes. I hope she didn't overstep." "No, it's fine. It's not exactly a secret." Jonas set the rifle aside and looked directly at Martha for the first time since the conversation started. "I don't talk about it much. Don't see the point in dwelling on what can't be changed. But I don't hide from it either. That's probably healthy. I've known folks who tried to pretend their grief didn't exist, and it just ate them up from the inside." "And you?" Jonas asked. "How are you handling your husband's death?" Martha considered the question carefully. "Some days better than others. Jacob was a good man, but he was tired. Tired of fighting soil that wouldn't cooperate, tired of watching his children go hungry, tired of failing. I think part of him was almost relieved when the fever took him. That's a hard thing to live with. The truth usually is," Martha resumed peeling the potato, "but I can't afford to fall apart. I've got 7 reasons to keep going, and they need me strong. So I grieve when I can and I push forward when I must." Jonas nodded slowly. "That takes courage." "No, Mr. Walker. Courage is taking in a family of strangers during a storm when you barely have enough supplies for yourself. Courage is sharing your bed and your food and your home with people who have nothing to offer you in return. That's courage." Jonas looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I did what anyone would do." "We both know that's not true. I've met plenty of people who would have ridden right past us, plenty who would have told themselves it wasn't their problem." "Then you've met some sorry excuses for human beings." Martha smiled despite herself. "Maybe so, but that makes the good ones all the more precious. Clara interrupted them by setting a pot of beans on the table with more force than necessary. Mr. Jonas, we're almost out of cornmeal, and the salt's getting low. I know, was planning to make a trip to town in a few days, weather permitting. Town? Martha sat up straighter. How far? 2 days' ride there and back. Maybe 3, if the roads are still bad. That's a long way. Jonas shrugged. It's the only town within 50 miles. You get used to the distance out here. Martha did some quick calculations in her head. 2 days without Jonas here meant she'd need to be strong enough to care for the children and manage the cabin alone. She'd need to be able to split wood, cook meals, handle any emergencies that might arise. 4 days ago, she'd been barely conscious. Now she was sitting upright and peeling potatoes, but she was a long way from being back to full strength. When are you planning to go? She asked. End of the week, probably. Gives you a few more days to recover. I'll be fine by then, Martha said, with more confidence than she felt. Jonas gave her a look that said he didn't believe her, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stood up and stretched. I'm going to check on the animals. Clara, keep an eye on your mama. Make sure she doesn't overdo it. After he left, Clara sat down next to Martha. He worries about you. He worries about everyone. That's just his nature. No, Mama, he worries about you specifically. I see the way he looks at you when you're not paying attention. Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks. Clara Allen, that's enough of that kind of talk. The man is just being kind to strangers in need. But later that night, as Martha lay in Jonas's bed listening to her children breathe softly around her, she found herself thinking about Clara's words, about the way Jonas had looked at her when he'd carried her through the storm, about the gentleness in his hands when he'd checked her fever, about the protective edge in his voice when he'd told her she needed to rest. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her like that. Jacob had loved her, she knew, but toward the end he'd been too tired and broken to show it much. And before Jacob, well, she'd been so young when they married that she barely remembered what it was like to be courted, to be seen as something other than a wife and mother. Stop it, she told herself firmly. The man saved your life and gave you shelter. Don't go reading things into simple kindness that aren't there. But as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself hoping that maybe, just maybe, it was more than simple kindness. Because there was something about Jonas Walker that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. Something that made her think that maybe the future didn't have to be just about surviving. Maybe it could be about living, too. The next morning, Martha woke to find Jonas already gone and Clara making breakfast. When Jonas finally came back inside, his arms full of firewood, Martha was sitting at the table helping Elizabeth practice her letters. Morning, Jonas said, setting the wood down. You're looking better. I feel better. And it was true. The weakness was still there, but it was fading. She could feel her strength coming back bit by bit. Good, because I need to ride out to check on that wagon of yours today. See what shape it's in, what can be salvaged. Thought maybe Thomas could come with me, if you're comfortable with that. Thomas's head snapped up from where he was eating breakfast. Really? You want me to come? Could use an extra pair of hands, but only if your mama says it's all right. Thomas looked at Martha with such hope in his eyes that she couldn't possibly say no, even though the thought of her son being gone all day made her anxious. Of course you can go. Just promise me you'll be careful and do everything Mr. Jonas tells you. I promise, thank you, Mama. After they left, Martha found herself at loose ends. Clara had the housework well in hand, and the younger children were content playing quietly. Martha tried to rest like Jonas had instructed, but restlessness drove her to her feet. She needed to do something, needed to be useful. She started by organizing the cabin, which clearly hadn't seen a woman's touch in years. She found a broom and swept the floor, then washed the windows with water and a rag. She reorganized the pantry, taking stock of what supplies they had and what they'd need from town. She mended a tear in one of Jonas's shirts that had been hanging on a nail by the door. Clara watched her with worried eyes, but didn't try to stop her. They both knew that Martha needed this, needed to feel like she was contributing, like she wasn't just another mouth to feed. When Jonas and Thomas returned as the sun was setting, they brought news both good and bad. The wagon was repairable, but it would take time and materials Jonas didn't have. They'd managed to salvage most of the family's possessions, which Jonas had loaded onto his horse and into a small handcart he'd brought along. The bad news, Jonas said, setting down a heavy trunk, is that about half your supplies got ruined by the rain. Flour's all soggy, sugar's dissolved, most of the fabric's rotted. The good news is that your seed packets were in a tin and stayed dry, and most of your clothes are salvageable. Martha nodded, trying not to show her disappointment. She'd expected as much, but it still hurt to lose what little they'd had. I can fix the wagon, Jonas continued, but it'll take maybe a week of work, and I'll need to go to town for an axle and some other parts. Which means you and the children will be here a while longer, if that's all right with you. Martha looked around the cabin, at her children who had already started treating it like home, at Jonas, who was watching her with those careful, guarded eyes. "It's more than all right," she said quietly. "As long as you're sure you want us here." Something flickered across Jonas's face, too quick to read. "I'm sure." That night, they had their first real family meal together. Jonas had shot a deer the day before, and Clara had made a stew with the meat and vegetables from Jonas's root cellar. They all crowded around the small table. Jonas and Martha and 7 children, passing bowls and talking over each other in the way of large families. Jonas sat at the head of the table, and Martha found herself watching him as he listened to Thomas describe every detail of their wagon recovery expedition. The way Jonas's eyes crinkled when Matthew made a joke. The way he patiently cut up Emma's meat into small pieces without being asked. The way he praised Rebecca when she managed to drink her entire cup of milk without spilling. He was good with children, natural with them in a way that spoke of lost dreams and broken hopes. Martha wondered what kind of father he would have been if his baby had lived, what kind of husband he would have been if his wife had survived. "Stop it," she told herself again, but it was getting harder to listen to that voice of reason. After supper, Jonas brought out his fiddle, an old instrument that looked like it had seen better days, and played a few simple tunes. The children were delighted, especially when he let Thomas try to play. The boy had no talent whatsoever, producing nothing but squeaks and squawks, but Jonas was patient and encouraging. "You've got to feel the music," Jonas said, guiding Thomas's hands on the bow. "Don't think about it too much. Just let it flow." Martha sat in the rocking chair by the fire, mending one of Matthew's torn shirts, and felt something dangerous blooming in her chest, something warm and hopeful and terrifying. This felt right. This felt like family, like home. But it wasn't real, she reminded herself. This was temporary, a stopover on their way west. Jonas was helping them out of kindness, nothing more. As soon as she was well and the wagon was fixed, they'd be moving on. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. So why did the thought of leaving make her chest ache? "Mama, come dance with us," Sarah called, and before Martha could protest, Claire was pulling her to her feet and spinning her around to Jonas's fiddle music. The children laughed and clapped as Martha stumbled through the steps, her legs still weak but her heart lighter than it had been in months. And when she looked over at Jonas, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. For just a moment, their eyes met and held, and Martha saw everything she'd been feeling reflected back at her. The loneliness, the longing, the fear of hoping for something that seemed impossible. Then Jonas looked away, focusing intently on his fiddle, and the moment passed. But Martha knew. She knew that whatever was happening here, whatever was growing between them, it was real, it was dangerous. And it was going to change everything. The music faded, and Martha became acutely aware that she was standing in the middle of the cabin, breathing hard, with Jonas Walker staring at her like he'd just seen a ghost. Not a frightening ghost, but the kind that haunts you with memories of what used to be and what might have been. "I should put the children to bed," Martha said, her voice coming out rougher than she intended. Jonas nodded and set the fiddle down carefully, as if it might break. "It's late." Getting 7 children settled for the night was always a production, but Martha was grateful for the distraction. She helped Emma into her night clothes, listened to Matthew's prayers, tucked Rebecca and Elizabeth into their shared pallet of blankets. Clara, as always, tried to help with everything, and Martha had to gently remind her that she was a child too, that she deserved rest. "But Mama, you're still not fully well," Clara protested. "I'm well enough. Now lie down before you fall down." Through it all, Martha was aware of Jonas moving around the cabin, banking the fire, checking the door, doing all the small tasks that marked the end of a day. She was aware of him in a way that felt both comfortable and unsettling, like wearing new shoes that fit perfectly but still felt strange. When the children were finally asleep, Martha found Jonas sitting in the rocking chair staring into the dying fire. She should go to bed herself. She was still recovering, still needed rest, but something pulled her toward him, toward the quiet companionship of two adults at the end of a long day. "May I sit?" she asked softly. Jonas looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "Of course. It's your home as much as mine right now." Martha pulled up the other chair and sat down with a sigh. Her legs were trembling from the dancing, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from living instead of just surviving. They sat in silence for a while, watching the embers glow and fade. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind whispered through the eaves. "You didn't have to do that," Jonas said finally. "All the cleaning and organizing today? You should have been resting." I needed to feel useful, needed to do something besides lie in bed feeling like a burden. "You keep saying that word, burden, like it's something you need to apologize for." "Don't I?" Martha looked at him. "You saved our lives, Mr. Walker. You took us into your home when you didn't have to, fed us when you barely had enough for yourself. And all I've done is take up your bed and eat your food and turn your peaceful cabin into chaos." Jonas was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "This cabin hasn't been peaceful. It's been silent. There's a difference." Martha didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "After Caroline died," Jonas continued, still staring into the fire, "I thought silence was what I wanted. Thought if I could just be alone, if I could just not have to see reminders of what I'd lost everywhere I looked, I'd be all right. So I stayed here, worked the land, kept to myself, and for a while I convinced myself it was enough. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't." He finally looked at her, and Martha saw raw honesty in his eyes. "These past few days, with your children running around, with voices and laughter filling this place, it's been hard, real hard, because it reminds me of everything I lost. But it also reminds me that I'm still alive, that life is still happening, whether I want it to or not." Martha's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, we've brought pain as well as chaos." "No," Jonas shook his head firmly. "You've brought life, and that's something I didn't realize I was missing until it was here in front of me." They looked at each other across the small space between their chairs, and Martha felt that dangerous warmth spreading through her chest again. This wasn't just gratitude she was feeling, this was something more, something deeper, something that terrified her. "I should get some sleep," she said, standing up quickly. "Tomorrow's another day." Jonas stood as well. "Martha, Mrs. Allen, I hope I didn't speak out of turn." "You didn't. You spoke honestly. That's nothing to apologize for." She managed a smile. "Good night, Mr. Walker." "Good night." But as Martha lay in Jonas's bed that night, surrounded by her sleeping children, she couldn't stop thinking about his words, about the loneliness in his voice when he talked about silence, about the way he'd looked at her, like she was water, and he'd been dying of thirst. She'd known loss too. Known what it was to wake up each morning and have to convince yourself that getting out of bed was worth the effort. After Jacob died, she'd wanted to just stop. Stop fighting, stop struggling, stop carrying the weight of 7 lives on her shoulders. But her children needed her, so she'd kept going. One foot in front of the other, one day at a time. But here, in this cabin, with this man who understood grief in ways most people never would, Martha felt something she hadn't felt since before Jacob got sick. She felt hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope for something more. Hope for a future that included joy instead of just endurance. The question was, did she have the courage to reach for it? Morning came too soon, bringing with it the reality of work that needed doing. Jonas left early to start repairing the wagon, taking Thomas with him again. The boy was thriving under Jonas's attention, growing more confident each day. Martha watched them go, seeing how Thomas stood a little straighter, walked a little taller when he was with Jonas. Her son needed that, needed a man to show him how to be a man. Jacob had tried, but illness had robbed him of the strength and patience required. And Martha, for all her efforts, couldn't teach Thomas the things a father should teach a son. "Mama, the bread's burning!" Clara's shout jerked Martha back to the present. She rushed to the oven and pulled out the loaf, which was only slightly more charred than she'd intended. Sorry, I was wool gathering. Clara gave her a knowing look. Thinking about Mr. Jonas? Clara! Well, you were. I can tell by the way your face gets all soft when you look at him. Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks. My face does not get soft, and even if it did, that would be entirely inappropriate. Your father's only been gone a year. Papa would want you to be happy, Mama. He told me so before he died. He said I should make sure you didn't spend the rest of your life alone. Martha's eyes stung with sudden tears. He said that? Clara nodded. He said you were too young to be a widow forever. Said you deserved someone who could take care of you for a change, instead of you always taking care of everyone else. Martha had to sit down. Jacob had said that? Her tired, broken husband had thought about her future, about her happiness, even as he was dying. I miss him, Martha whispered. I miss him so much sometimes it feels like I can't breathe. Clara wrapped her arms around her mother. I know, I miss him too, but Mama, missing Papa doesn't mean you can't be happy again, doesn't mean you can't care about someone else. It's too soon. People would talk. Let them talk. We're going west, remember? We'll never see those people again anyway. Martha laughed despite herself. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. The days developed a rhythm. Jonas worked on the wagon while Martha grew stronger, taking over more of the household duties. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and told stories to the younger children. Clara helped with everything, but Martha insisted she take time to just be a girl too, to play with her sisters instead of always working. Thomas came back from his days with Jonas full of new knowledge, how to set a trap, how to read animal tracks, how to judge the weather by the clouds. He talked constantly about Mr. Jonas says this, and Mr. Jonas taught me that, and Martha saw hero worship blooming in her son's eyes. It should have worried her. They were getting too comfortable here, too attached. But every time she thought about leaving, about packing up the children and heading west again, her heart rebelled against the idea. One afternoon, while Jonas was in town getting supplies for the wagon repair, Martha decided to tackle the vegetable garden behind the cabin. It was overgrown with weeds and clearly hadn't been tended in years, but she could see the bones of what had once been a productive plot. She was on her knees pulling weeds when Clara came out. Mama, you shouldn't be doing that. You're still recovering. I'm fine. Besides, it feels good to work the soil again. I've missed it. Clara knelt beside her and started pulling weeds, too. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the sun warm on their backs, the smell of earth rich and promising. This was his wife's garden, Clara said softly. Mr. Jonas told me. Said she loved growing things. Said she had a gift for making plants thrive even in difficult soil. Martha looked at the neglected beds and felt a wave of sadness. She would be heartbroken to see it like this. Maybe. Or maybe she'd be glad someone's finally caring for it again. They worked until the sun started to set, clearing out years of neglect, preparing the beds for new growth. When Jonas returned and saw what they'd done, he stood for a long time just staring at the garden, his face unreadable. I should have asked, Martha said, suddenly worried she'd overstepped. I'm sorry. I didn't think— No, Jonas interrupted. No, it's good. It's good to see it cared for again. He cleared his throat roughly. Caroline would be happy. That night at supper, Jonas was quieter than usual. Martha caught him looking at her several times with an expression she couldn't quite read. After the children were in bed, he asked if she'd sit with him again by the fire. I need to tell you something, he said once they were settled, about why I really brought you here. Martha's stomach clenched. All right. When I found you collapsed in the mud, when I saw those 7 children about to lose their mother, something in me just broke. Or maybe it healed, I don't know. But I couldn't leave you there, couldn't ride away and pretend I hadn't seen. Not because I'm a good man, but because I'm a selfish one. Jonas, I don't understand. He turned to look at her fully. I brought you here because I needed you here. Needed the noise and the chaos and the life you brought with you. I told myself it was about helping you, about being decent. But the truth is I was helping myself. I was filling this cabin with something besides ghosts. Martha's heart was pounding. That doesn't make you selfish. That makes you human. Does it? Jonas's laugh was bitter. Because the really selfish part is that now that you're here, now that I've had a taste of what life could be like again, I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay. You and all 7 of your children. I want to fix that wagon and then convince you not to use it. I want to wake up every morning to the sound of children laughing and go to bed every night knowing this cabin is full of life instead of silence. Martha couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He was saying everything she'd been feeling but hadn't dared to voice. But that's not fair to you, Jonas continued. You came here by accident, by necessity. You have plans, dreams of going west and starting over. I have no right to ask you to give that up. No right to want what I want. And what do you want? Martha's voice came out as barely a whisper. Jonas looked at her with such naked longing that Martha felt it in her bones. I want what I can't have. A second chance at the life I lost. A family. A future. You. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger and hope. Jonas. Don't answer now. Don't say anything you might regret. I just needed you to know. Needed to be honest about why I've been so insistent that you stay. Why I keep finding excuses to delay the wagon repairs. It's not just kindness, Martha. It's selfishness wrapped up in a pretty bow. Martha stood up on shaking legs. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding, every instinct warring with every other. Part of her wanted to run, to grab her children and leave before this got any more complicated. But a larger part wanted to stay, wanted to see where this could lead, wanted to be selfish too. I need to think, she said finally. I need time to think. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. But as Martha lay awake that night, she realized that thinking wasn't the problem. She already knew what she wanted. The question was whether she had the courage to take it. The next few days were awkward. Martha and Jonas danced around each other, polite and careful, neither mentioning their conversation. But the tension was there, simmering beneath every interaction, every shared glance, every accidental touch. Thomas noticed. Is something wrong between you and Mr. Jonas? He asked one evening as Martha was helping him with his letters. No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? You're both acting funny, all polite and distant-like. Before you were friends, now you're like strangers. Out of the mouths of children, Martha sighed and set down the slate. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about things. It doesn't mean anything's wrong, it just means we're figuring things out. Are we still going west? The question caught Martha off guard. I don't know, Thomas. Maybe. We'll see. I don't want to go west. Thomas's voice was small and honest. I like it here. Mr. Jonas is teaching me things, important things. And we have a real home here, Mama. I don't want to live in a wagon anymore. Martha pulled her son into her arms. I know, baby. I know. That night she made a decision. She waited until the children were asleep, then went to where Jonas was sitting on the porch, watching the stars. May I join you? He looked up, surprised. Always. Martha sat down beside him, gathering her courage. I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting us to stay. Jonas went very still. And I need to tell you about Jacob, about our marriage, because I think you should know who you're asking to stay. Martha, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She took a deep breath. Jacob was a good man, a kind man, but our marriage wasn't a love match, not at first anyway. I was 17 and pregnant by a boy who ran off when he found out. My father arranged the marriage to save my reputation. Jacob was 10 years older, a widower with no children, and he needed a wife. So we made a deal. Jonas didn't say anything, just listened. Thomas isn't Jacob's son by blood, Martha continued. But Jacob raised him as his own, never once treated him different, and over time we built something real. Not passion, maybe, but partnership, respect, affection. When the other children came, he loved them all. He worked himself to death trying to give us a better life. Why are you telling me this? Martha looked at him. Because I don't want you building some perfect image of me in your head. I'm not a tragic widow who lost her great love. I'm a woman who made the best of a difficult situation, who built a life out of necessity rather than choice. I'm practical and stubborn, and sometimes too proud for my own good. I have 7 children, Jonas. 7 children who will always come first, always be my priority. And I'm telling you all this because if you really want us to stay, you need to know what you're getting into." Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I watched you collapse in the mud and thought you were dead. In that moment, before I found your pulse, I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 years. I felt panic, fear, the kind of desperate terror that comes from caring about someone you might lose, and I didn't even know your name yet." He turned to face her fully. "You think I built some perfect image of you? Martha, I've watched you struggle to walk across the room. I've heard you cry at night when you think no one's listening. I've seen you snap at your children when you're exhausted and overwhelmed. I've watched you be human, flawed, real, and I want you anyway. All of you, all 7 children of you." Martha felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared. So am I. What if it doesn't work? What if we try this and it falls apart? My children have already lost one father. I can't put them through that again." "Then we don't fall apart." Jonas reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd deliberately touched her since that night in the storm. "We work at it. We fight for it. We build something strong enough to weather whatever comes. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple. Nothing worth having ever is. But Martha, I've spent 8 years alone in this cabin, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that being alone is worse than any difficulty we might face together." Martha looked down at their joined hands, his rough and scarred from work, hers red and chapped from washing and cooking. They were the hands of survivors, of people who'd been knocked down and gotten back up. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. "My children need stability," she said slowly. "They need to know that this is real, that you're not going to change your mind in a month or a year when the novelty wears off. I know. And I need time. Time to be sure this is right. Time to let my children adjust. Time to honor Jacob's memory properly. I can give you time, as much as you need." Martha met his eyes. "And I need you to understand that I'm not Caroline. I can't replace what you lost. I don't want you to replace her. I want you to be exactly who you are." They sat in silence, hands still joined, looking out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted and the wind carried the scent of approaching autumn. "I think," Martha said slowly, "that I would like to stay. Not forever, not yet, but for a while. Long enough to see if this feeling between us is real or just gratitude and loneliness pretending to be something more." Jonas's hand tightened on hers. "That's all I'm asking. The children need to be part of this decision, especially Clara and Thomas. They're old enough to understand." "Agreed. And we take this slow. No rushing into anything. We figure out how to be friends first, how to be a family, before we think about being anything else." "Whatever you need, Martha. Whatever pace feels right." She laughed softly. "You're being awfully agreeable. Because you're staying. Because you're giving this a chance. I'd agree to just about anything right now." They sat together on that porch until the moon rose high and the temperature dropped enough to drive them inside. And when Martha finally went to bed, surrounded by her sleeping children in Jonas's cabin that was starting to feel like home, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe the storm that had brought them here wasn't an accident. Maybe it was a second chance. For all of them. The next morning, Martha gathered her children around the table after breakfast. Jonas stood awkwardly by the fireplace, clearly uncomfortable being part of such an intimate family discussion, but unwilling to leave. "Children, I need to talk to you about something important," Martha began. "About our plans for going west." 7 pairs of eyes watched her intently. "Mr. Jonas has asked if we might consider staying here instead, making this our home. And I wanted to know what you all think about that." There was a moment of stunned silence, then everyone started talking at once. Martha held up her hand for quiet. "One at a time. Clara, you're oldest. What do you think?" Clara looked at Jonas, then back at her mother. "I think Papa would want us to be safe and happy, and we're both of those things here. So yes, Mama. I think we should stay." Thomas nodded vigorously. "I want to stay. Mr. Jonas is teaching me to be a man, Mama. Real skills, important things. I don't want to leave." One by one, the other children voiced their agreement. Even little Emma, who didn't fully understand what was being discussed, clapped her hands and said, "Stay! Stay!" Martha looked at Jonas, who was watching the scene with undisguised emotion in his eyes. "Then it's settled. We stay." The relief on Jonas's face was almost painful to witness. "You won't regret this. I promise, Martha. I'll take care of all of you. We'll take care of each other," Martha corrected gently. "That's what families do." And there it was, spoken aloud for the first time. Family. Not a widow and her children imposing on a kind stranger, but a family choosing to build something new from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. It took 3 weeks for their new reality to settle in. 3 weeks of learning each other's rhythms and habits, of discovering how to share space and time and the small intimacies of daily life. Jonas finished repairing the wagon, but instead of preparing it for travel west, they used it to haul supplies from town and firewood from the forest. The wagon became a tool of staying rather than leaving, and somehow that felt right. Martha had just finished hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Visitors were rare this far from town, and something about the deliberate pace of the horse made her stomach tighten with unease. "Clara," she called, keeping her voice steady. "Take the children inside." Clara, who had developed an instinct for her mother's moods, gathered her siblings without question and herded them toward the cabin. Jonas was in the barn working on a new chicken coop, and Martha could see him emerge, wiping his hands on his pants, his body language instantly alert. The rider came into view, and Martha's world tilted sideways. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But there he was, gaunt and dusty, older than she remembered but unmistakably, impossibly alive. Jacob Allen sat on a tired-looking horse, a battered lantern swinging from his saddle, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. "Martha," he said, his voice rough with disuse or emotion, or both. "Thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you." Martha couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This was a dream, a nightmare, some cruel trick her exhausted mind was playing on her. Jacob was dead. She'd watched him die, had held his hand as the fever took him, had buried him in the hard ground behind their old house. "You're dead," she whispered. Jacob dismounted slowly, stiffly, like a man who'd been riding for days. "I know that's what you thought, what everyone thought, but I'm here, Martha. I'm alive." Jonas was beside her now, his presence solid and grounding. "Who are you?" "Jacob Allen, Martha's husband." Jacob's eyes moved between them, and something flickered across his face. Understanding, maybe, or suspicion. "And you are?" "Jonas Walker. I found your wife and children near death in a storm 6 weeks ago. Brought them here." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. 6 weeks. Long enough for Martha to have built a new life. Long enough for her to have started healing, started hoping, started falling for the man standing beside her. "Martha, I need to explain," Jacob started. "Inside." Martha's voice came out stronger than she felt. "Not out here. The children—" Her voice broke. "The children think you're dead." They moved toward the cabin in a strange, silent procession. Martha's mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, trying to understand how the world could turn upside down twice in the span of 2 months. The children were clustered around Clara when they entered, and the moment Thomas saw Jacob, he made a sound somewhere between a sob and a shout. "Papa?" Then chaos erupted. The children surged forward, crying and laughing and shouting all at once. Jacob dropped to his knees and gathered as many of them as he could into his arms, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My babies," he choked out. "My sweet babies. I've missed you so much." Martha stood frozen, watching her children reunite with the father they'd mourned. She felt Jonas beside her, felt the careful space he was maintaining between them, and wanted to scream at the universe for its cruel timing. Emma, who had been only 2 when Jacob left and barely remembered him, hung back uncertainly, clutching Martha's skirt. Rebecca and Elizabeth were crying but seemed confused, caught between joy and fear. Thomas and Clara clung to their father like they'd never let go. It was Jonas who finally broke through the pandemonium. "Children, why don't you give your father some space? He looks like he could use some food and water." The authority in his voice got through to them, and they reluctantly pulled back. Jacob stood slowly, And Martha could see how thin he was, how exhausted. Whatever he'd been through had aged him beyond his years. "Sit," Jonas said, pulling out a chair at the table. "Martha, I'll get some food ready." But Martha was already moving, years of being a wife overriding her shock. She ladled stew into a bowl, sliced bread, poured water. Her hands were shaking, but she managed. She always managed. Jacob ate like a starving man, which he probably was. The children watched him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, and Martha realized with a pang that they'd already started to forget him. 6 weeks wasn't long in the grand scheme of things, but to young children, it was an eternity. "How?" Martha finally asked, sitting down across from him. "Jacob, we thought you were dead. I buried you." Jacob set down his spoon and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I know, I was as good as dead, I suppose. The fever had me bad, Martha, real bad. I remember you there beside me, remember holding your hand, and then nothing, just darkness." He paused, gathering his thoughts or his courage. "Turns out I didn't die. I was so close that Doc Henderson thought I was gone, told you I was gone. But I was in what they call a coma, I guess. My body was there, but my mind was somewhere else. I woke up 3 weeks later in the church basement. The preacher had kept my body there, planning to bury me proper once the ground thawed." Martha felt sick. 3 weeks after she thought she'd buried him, he'd woken up. 3 weeks she could have turned around, could have gone back. But by then she and the children had already sold everything, had already set out west. "Why didn't you come after us right away?" Clara asked, her voice small. "I tried, baby. Soon as I was strong enough to stand, I went to the house, but you were already gone. Neighbors said you'd headed west, but nobody knew exactly where. I spent weeks just trying to get my strength back, trying to find work to earn money for a horse and supplies. Then I started following your trail." Jacob looked at Martha with eyes full of pain and accusation. "A year, Martha. I've been searching for a year, following every lead, asking in every town. I was starting to think I'd never find you." A year. Martha's mind reeled. She'd been so focused on the 6 weeks since they'd arrived at Jonas's cabin that she hadn't properly processed the timeline. Jacob had been alive and searching for them for a year while she'd been building a new life, letting herself care for another man. The guilt crashed over her like a wave. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Jacob, I'm so sorry. I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead. I know that. I'm not blaming you for leaving." But there was something in his voice that suggested maybe he was blaming her for something. His eyes moved to Jonas, who had positioned himself near the fireplace, separate from the family scene but still present. "What I need to know is what happens now." The question hung in the air like a sword ready to drop. Martha looked at her children, at Jacob, at Jonas. She thought about the past 6 weeks, about the life she'd started to imagine, about the feelings she'd allowed herself to have. "Now you rest," she said, because it was the only answer she could give that wouldn't shatter someone. "You've been traveling for days by the look of you. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." Jonas cleared his throat. "You can have my bed. I'll sleep in the barn." "Jonas, no," Martha started. "It's fine. You and your husband need privacy to talk, to figure things out." Jonas's voice was carefully neutral, but Martha could see the pain in his eyes. "I'll just grab a few things." He left before Martha could protest further, and suddenly the cabin felt smaller, the air thicker. Jacob was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He's been good to you," Jacob said. It wasn't quite a question. "He saved our lives, took us in when we had nothing. Looks like he gave you more than just shelter." Martha's spine stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I saw how you looked at each other, how he stood beside you, like he had a right to be there. He did have a right. He's been more of a father to these children in 6 weeks than—" Martha stopped herself, horrified by what she'd almost said. But Jacob had heard enough. "Than I was in years of breaking my back trying to provide for them? Is that what you were going to say? Jacob, I didn't mean— Didn't you?" Jacob stood up, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "I died trying to give you a better life, and the moment I'm gone, you replace me? You weren't gone. You were dead." Martha was on her feet too, anger burning through her guilt. "I mourned you, Jacob. I grieved. And then I had to keep living because 7 children needed me to keep living. Don't you dare make me feel guilty for surviving." The children had scattered to corners of the cabin, eyes wide with fear. They'd never heard their parents fight like this. Martha and Jacob had always been careful, always kept their disagreements private. Martha took a deep breath, forcing herself to lower her voice. "I'm sorry. You're exhausted and I'm in shock and we're saying things we don't mean. Please, just rest. We'll talk in the morning when we're both thinking clearer." Jacob stared at her for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "Fine. Where's this bed I'm supposed to sleep in?" Martha showed him, then gathered the children and took them outside, needing air, needing space, needing to process what had just happened. Jonas was in the barn, spreading hay to make a bed for himself. He looked up when they entered, his face carefully blank. "Is he settled?" Jonas asked. "For now." Martha sat down on a hay bale, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The children clustered around her, and she could feel their confusion, their fear. "Mama?" Clara said softly. "What's going to happen?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." Jonas crouched down in front of Emma, who had started to cry. "Hey there, little one. It's all right. Your papa came back. That's a good thing." "But what about you?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "Are you going to leave?" The question hit Martha like a physical blow. In all the chaos of Jacob's return, she hadn't thought about what it would mean for Jonas. This was his home. They were the ones who would have to leave. "No one's leaving tonight," Jonas said firmly. "Tonight we're all going to sleep, and tomorrow we'll figure things out, all right?" He looked at Martha when he said it, and she saw everything he wasn't saying. "I love you. I don't want to lose you, but I'll let you go if that's what you need to do." "Children, go back inside," Martha said. "Get ready for bed. I'll be there in a minute." After they left, Martha and Jonas sat in the barn's dim light, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I should have known," Martha said. "Should have known it was too good to be true, that I couldn't just start over and be happy." "Martha, he's alive, Jonas. My husband is alive, which means I'm still his wife, which means everything we talked about, everything we were starting to build, it can't happen." "I know." "You know? That's all you have to say?" Jonas turned to look at her fully. "What do you want me to say? That I'm going to fight for you? That I'm going to tell your husband he can't have his family back? Martha, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not that kind of man. So you're just going to let us go?" "If that's what needs to happen, yes." Jonas's voice was rough with emotion. "But I'm not going to pretend it won't destroy me. I'm not going to pretend these past 6 weeks haven't been the best of my life since Caroline died. I'm not going to pretend I haven't fallen in love with you and every one of your children." Martha's breath caught. "Jonas? But he's their father. He came back from the dead for them. For you. And I have no right to stand in the way of that, no matter how much I want to." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on both of them. "I don't know what to do," Martha whispered. "I thought I'd grieved him, thought I'd moved on. But seeing him today, seeing how much he's suffered to find us, how can I turn him away?" "You can't. And I'm not asking you to." Jonas stood up and gathered his blankets. "You need to talk to him, Martha. Really talk to him. Figure out what he wants, what you want. What's best for those children. And what about what you want?" Jonas looked at her with such raw pain that Martha felt it in her bones. "What I want doesn't matter. It never did." He left the barn then, and Martha sat alone in the darkness, feeling like her heart was being torn in 2 different directions. When she finally went back inside, Jacob was already asleep in Jonas's bed, snoring softly. The children were on their pallets, but none of them seemed to be sleeping. Clara was staring at the ceiling. Thomas was curled up tight with his back to the room, and the younger ones were sniffling quietly. Martha lay down among them, and Emma immediately crawled into her arms. "Is Papa going to take us away?" Emma whispered. "I don't know, baby. I don't want to go. I like it here. I like Mr. Jonas." "I know, so do I." Martha held her daughter and stared at the ceiling, listening to Jacob breathe, to her children shift and sigh, to the wind whistle through the eaves. Somewhere outside, Jonas was sleeping in the barn, alone and hurting. And here inside, her supposedly dead husband had returned to reclaim a life that Martha was no longer sure she wanted to give back. How had everything gotten so complicated so quickly? Morning came too soon, bringing with it a tension that filled the cabin like smoke. Jacob was up before Martha, which surprised her. He'd always been a late sleeper, reluctant to face each new day. But grief and loss had changed him, just as it had changed her. He was sitting at the table when she woke, drinking coffee that Jonas must have made before disappearing outside. The children were still sleeping, exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the previous day. "We need to talk," Jacob said quietly. Martha nodded and poured herself coffee, needing the fortification. She sat down across from him, studying his face in the early morning light. He looked older, harder, like the year of searching had carved away everything soft in him. "I need you to understand what this past year has been like," Jacob began. "Waking up in a church basement, thinking I'd been buried alive. Finding out my family was gone, that you'd left without me. Spending months too weak to do anything but lie there and think about everything I'd lost." "Jacob, I'm sorry." "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm trying to explain. When I finally got strong enough to travel, finding you became the only thing that mattered. The only thing that kept me going through the hard days, through the times when I wanted to just give up and die for real. I told myself that if I could just find you, if I could just see my children again, everything would be all right." He paused, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup like he was trying to draw warmth from it. "But now I'm here, and nothing's all right, because I can see that you've moved on, that you've built a new life without me, and I don't know where I fit in that life anymore." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "I thought you were dead. I mourned you, Jacob, truly mourned you, and then I had to keep going for the children. Had to be strong when all I wanted to do was fall apart." "And him? Jonas? What is he to you?" Martha wanted to lie, wanted to protect everyone from the truth, but Jacob deserved honesty, even if it hurt. "He's someone who reminded me what it feels like to be seen as more than just a mother. Someone who made me laugh again, who made me feel safe. Someone I was starting to care for deeply." "You love him?" "I don't know. Maybe. I didn't let myself think about it that way because it felt disloyal to you, to your memory. But yes, I think maybe I was falling in love with him." Jacob flinched like she'd hit him. "And the children? Are they attached to him too?" "Yes, especially Thomas. Jonas has been teaching him things, giving him the kind of attention he needs. They all love him." "So what you're saying is that I came back too late, that I should have stayed dead." "No, Jacob, that's not what I'm saying at all." Martha reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm saying that the situation is complicated, that there are no easy answers here. You're their father. They love you, but Jonas has become important to them too." Jacob pulled his hand away. "I've been thinking about it all night, about what's best for everyone, and I think we need to keep moving west, all of us. Start over somewhere new, away from here, away from him." "You want to leave? Today?" "As soon as we can pack up the wagon. I know it's sudden, but Martha, we can't stay here, not with him here. It's not right. You're my wife, they're my children. We need to be a family again, and we can't do that here." Martha's mind was reeling. Leave today? Just pack up and go, abandoning Jonas and the home they'd started to build? The thought made her physically ill. "The children just got settled. They're happy here, Jacob, safe. Is it really fair to uproot them again so soon? Is it fair to let them get more attached to a man who isn't their father? Martha, every day we stay here is another day they bond with him, another day it gets harder to leave. We need to go now, before it's too late." "Too late for what?" "Too late for us. Too late for our family." Jacob's voice cracked. "I can see it in your eyes, Martha. You don't want to leave. You don't want to come with me. But you have to. You're my wife." The words hung between them, heavy and demanding, and Martha realized he was right. She didn't want to leave, didn't want to pack up the children and head west with a man who felt like a stranger now. But what choice did she have? The cabin door opened and Jonas came in, stomping mud from his boots. He took in the scene, Martha and Jacob at the table, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife, and started to back out. "Don't leave on my account," Jacob said, his voice hard. Martha and I were just discussing our plans. We'll be leaving today, heading west like we originally intended. Jonas's face went blank, carefully neutral, but Martha saw the pain flash through his eyes. I see. Do you? Jacob stood up. Do you see that she's my wife, that those are my children, that we're a family? Do you see that whatever you thought was happening here is over? Jacob, stop, Martha said, standing too. He doesn't deserve that. Doesn't he? He took my wife, stole my children's affections. He saved our lives. Martha's voice rose, and she heard stirring from where the children were sleeping. She forced herself to speak more quietly. Jonas Walker found us dying in the mud and brought us to safety. He fed us, sheltered us, cared for us when we had nothing and no one. He gave freely without expecting anything in return. And you will not speak to him that way in his own home. Jacob stared at her like he didn't recognize her. You've changed. Yes, I have. We all have. Death changes people, Jacob. Real death, or the kind where you're mourned and buried and missed. We're not the same people we were a year ago. The children were awake now, listening with wide eyes. Jonas moved to the door. I'll be in the barn if anyone needs me, he said quietly, and left before Martha could stop him. The rest of the day was a blur of packing and tension. Jacob insisted they prepare to leave at first light the next day, and Martha found herself going through the motions while her heart screamed in protest. The children were subdued, sensing the conflict even if they didn't fully understand it. Clara found Martha in the garden, gathering the last of the vegetables they'd planted. Mama, do we have to go? Martha's hand stilled on a tomato plant. Your father thinks it's best. But what do you think? What do you want? What did she want? Martha looked at the garden she'd restored, at the cabin that had become home, at the barn where Jonas was probably sitting alone and hurting. She wanted to stay, wanted it with a fierceness that terrified her. It doesn't matter what I want, Clara. Your father is alive. He's my husband. We owe him loyalty. But Mama... No, Clara. This conversation is over. That night, Martha lay awake between her sleeping children, listening to Jacob snore in Jonas's bed. Tomorrow they would leave. Tomorrow she would pack up the wagon, gather her children, and head west with a man who used to be her husband, but now felt like a stranger. Tomorrow she would leave behind the man who had shown her what it felt like to be truly seen, truly valued. Tomorrow she would break her own heart. But what choice did she have? Jacob was alive. He was her husband, the children's father. Leaving him would be abandoning her vows, would be choosing her own happiness over her duty. And Martha had never been the kind of woman who put herself first. So why did doing the right thing feel so utterly wrong? Dawn broke gray and cold, matching Martha's mood as she mechanically folded clothes and packed them into the wagon. Jacob had already loaded most of their salvaged possessions, working with a grim determination that spoke of a man trying to outrun his doubts. The children moved like ghosts through the morning routine, eating breakfast in silence, avoiding eye contact with each other, and especially with Jonas, who had come in from the barn looking like he hadn't slept at all. Martha was tying down the last bundle when she heard Clara's voice, sharp and defiant in a way she'd never heard before. No! Everyone turned to look at her. Clara stood in the middle of the yard, arms crossed, chin lifted in that stubborn way that reminded Martha so much of herself. Clara, get in the wagon, Jacob said, his voice carrying the weight of paternal authority. No, Clara repeated. I'm not going. Jacob's face darkened. Young lady, I am your father, and you will do as I say. You were my father. You left us. Clara's voice shook but held firm. You died and left Mama to handle everything alone. You weren't there when we were starving, weren't there when the wagon broke, weren't there when Mama collapsed in the mud and almost died. Mr. Jonas was there. Mr. Jonas saved us, and now you show up and expect us to just leave with you like nothing happened? Clara, Martha moved toward her daughter, torn between pride and horror at the disrespect. But Clara wasn't finished. I watched Mama cry herself to sleep for months after you died. Watched her work herself to exhaustion trying to keep us fed. Watched her give up her own food so we could eat. And then Mr. Jonas came along, and for the first time in a year, I saw Mama smile. Really smile. Like she was alive again instead of just surviving. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but she kept going. You want to know what I think? I think you're scared. Scared that we don't need you anymore. Scared that you can't compete with a man who actually showed up when we needed him. So you're trying to take us away before we can choose him over you. The silence that followed was deafening. Jacob's face had gone white, then red, then white again. Martha stood frozen, unable to defend either her husband or her daughter because Clara had spoken truths that Martha herself had been too afraid to voice. Is that what you all think? Jacob asked, looking at the other children. That I abandoned you? That I chose to die? Thomas stepped forward, his young face struggling with conflicting loyalties. Papa, we know you didn't choose it, but Clara's right about one thing. Mr. Jonas was there when you weren't. He taught me how to be strong, how to work hard, how to take care of Mama and my sisters and brothers. He made us feel safe. And I can't? Jacob's voice cracked. I'm your father. I should be the one making you feel safe. You should have been, Clara said quietly. But you weren't. And we can't just pretend like this past year didn't happen, like we didn't learn to live without you. Jacob turned to Martha, desperation written across his face. Martha, tell them we're a family. Tell them they have to come with us. But Martha found herself looking past Jacob to where Jonas stood on the porch, carefully keeping his distance from this family drama, but unable to hide the pain in his eyes. She thought about the past 6 weeks, about learning to laugh again, about feeling seen and valued. She thought about Jonas's gentleness with her children, his patience with her grief, his willingness to give her time and space to heal. And she thought about Jacob, the Jacob she'd married, the Jacob who had worked himself to death trying to provide for them, the Jacob who had spent a year searching for them, driven by love and duty and determination. That Jacob deserved her loyalty, deserved her respect. But was that enough? Jacob, Martha said slowly, I think we need to talk, really talk. Without the children listening, without rushing to leave. We need to figure out what we're really doing here. What's there to figure out? You're my wife. They're my children. We belong together. Do we? The question slipped out before Martha could stop it, and she saw Jacob flinch as if she'd slapped him. I'm sorry, but I have to ask. Do we really belong together anymore? Or are we just trying to resurrect something that died along with the man I buried? I'm standing right here, Martha. I'm alive. I came back for you. But who did you come back for? The woman I was a year ago? Because, Jacob, that woman doesn't exist anymore. She died in that mud alongside you. The woman standing here now, she's someone different. Someone who learned she was stronger than she thought. Someone who learned she deserved more than just surviving. Jonas moved then, stepping off the porch. This is between you and your husband. I should go. No. Martha's voice was firm. No, you should stay, because this involves you too, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. Jacob's jaw tightened. So it's true then. You do have feelings for him. Yes. Martha felt the word leave her lips like a confession and a declaration at once. Yes, I have feelings for Jonas. I didn't plan for it to happen, didn't want it to happen, but it did, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. She turned to face Jonas fully. I'm tired of pretending that these past 6 weeks haven't been some of the happiest of my life, that waking up in your cabin hasn't felt more like home than anywhere I've been in years, that watching you with my children hasn't made me feel things I thought were dead and buried. Jonas's eyes were bright with emotion. Martha. But I'm also tired of pretending that my marriage to Jacob was something it wasn't. We were partners, Jacob and I. Good partners who raised children and worked the land and built a life together. But we were never in love, not really. We were two people who needed each other and made the best of it. Jacob looked like she'd gutted him. That's not true. I loved you. You loved what I represented. Security, partnership, a mother for children you wanted to have. And I loved you too, in my way. But Jacob, be honest with yourself. If you'd had a choice, if I hadn't been pregnant and desperate, would you have chosen me? Would I have been the woman you dreamed about? The silence stretched out, and Martha had her answer in Jacob's inability to respond. I thought so, she said softly. And that's okay. We built something good from necessity. But Jacob, You can't come back from the dead and expect everything to be the same. You can't expect me to be the same woman, to want the same life. So what are you saying? Jacob's voice was barely above a whisper. You're choosing him over me? Martha looked at her children, 7 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting to see what she would decide. She thought about duty and desire, about what she owed the past and what she owed the future. She thought about being the kind of woman who always put others first, and the kind of woman who recognized that sometimes putting yourself first was the only way to truly take care of those you loved. I'm saying I need you to tell me the truth, the real truth. Did you spend this past year searching for us because you loved us, or because you felt like you'd failed us and needed to prove something to yourself? Jacob's face twisted with anguish. Does it matter? Yes, it matters more than anything. He was quiet for a long moment, struggling with something internal. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. Both. I searched for you because I loved you, because you were my family, but also because I couldn't stand the thought of dying a failure. Couldn't stand the idea that my children would remember me as the man who worked himself to death for nothing. I needed to find you, needed to prove I could do at least one thing right. Martha nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. But that doesn't change anything. You're still my wife. Am I? Martha moved closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. Jacob, look at me. Really look at me. Not at the woman you remember, but at the woman standing in front of you right now. Do you see someone you want to spend your life with, or do you see an obligation, a duty, something you need to reclaim because losing it made you feel like less of a man? Jacob stared at her, and Martha watched the realization dawn across his face. The truth he'd been avoiding, the thing he'd been running from for the past year. I don't know who you are anymore, he whispered. I know. And I don't know who you are either. We're strangers, Jacob, strangers who share a history and 7 beautiful children, but strangers nonetheless. So what do we do? Martha took a deep breath. I think you need to stay for a while. Not leave today, not rush into anything. Stay and get to know your children again. Let them get to know you. Figure out what kind of relationship you want to have with them going forward. And you? Jacob's eyes moved between Martha and Jonas. What about us? There is no us anymore. Not in the way you mean. But there can be respect, friendship, maybe, in time. A partnership in raising these children. But Jacob, I can't be your wife again. My heart isn't in it, and you deserve someone who can love you the way you need to be loved. You're choosing him. It wasn't a question this time. Martha looked at Jonas, who had been standing silent through this entire exchange, his face a careful mask. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want instead of what I should want. And if Jonas will have me, if he's willing to take on not just me, but 7 children, and a complicated situation with their father, then yes, I'm choosing him too. Jonas crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Martha Allen, I would take on an army for you. 7 children and a complicated ex-husband are nothing. I'm not her ex-husband, Jacob protested. We're still married. In the eyes of God and the law, she's still my wife. Then I'll get a divorce, Martha said, and the words felt revolutionary. Women in her position didn't divorce. They endured. They made do. They sacrificed their happiness for propriety and duty. But Martha was done sacrificing. It might take time, might cause scandal, but I'll do it. Because staying in a marriage that's dead is worse than being alone. You won't be alone, Jonas said, taking her hand. You'll never be alone again. Clara started crying, but they were tears of relief rather than sadness. She rushed to her mother and wrapped her arms around her waist. You mean it, Mama. We can stay. If that's what you all want. But your father has rights, too. We'll need to figure out how to share you, how to make sure you have relationships with both of us. Thomas looked at Jacob, his young face serious. Papa, I want to know you. Want to spend time with you and learn from you. But I want Mr. Jonas, too. Can't we have both? Jacob looked at his son, at all his children, and something in him seemed to break and heal at the same time. I suppose I don't have much choice, do I? It's either share you or lose you completely. You won't lose us, Martha said gently. But you might have to redefine what being a father means. It doesn't mean owning us or controlling us. It means being present, being supportive, being willing to put our needs before your pride. Jacob sank down onto the wagon's tailgate, looking defeated. This isn't how I imagined it. Spent a year picturing our reunion, and it looked nothing like this. Life rarely looks like we imagine it, Jonas said, speaking to Jacob directly for the first time. Believe me, I know, but sometimes the life we end up with is better than the one we planned. Easy for you to say. You're getting everything you want. Am I? Jonas's voice was quiet. I'm getting the woman I love, yes, but I'm also getting 7 children who will always have divided loyalties. A situation that will probably cause talk and judgment in town. The knowledge that I'm part of breaking apart a family, even if that family was already broken. That's not easy, Jacob. That's complicated and messy and hard. But you're still choosing it. I'm choosing Martha. The rest comes with the territory. Jonas looked at the other man with something that might have been sympathy. Look, I'm not going to pretend to understand what you've been through. Waking up from death, searching for your family for a year, finding them but not being able to have them back the way you want. That's got to be hell. And I'm sorry for that, truly. But punishing Martha and those children for moving on isn't going to heal whatever's broken inside you. Jacob was quiet for a long time, staring at the ground. When he finally looked up, there was resignation in his eyes. What do you suggest? Stay for a few weeks. Build the children's trust again. Let them see that you're steady, that you're going to be there for them. And then, when you're ready, find a place nearby. Close enough that the children can see you regularly, far enough that we all have space to figure out what this new arrangement looks like. You want me to be neighbors with my ex-wife and her new husband? Jacob's laugh was bitter. I want what's best for those 7 children. And what's best for them is having both their parents in their lives. Not at war, not competing, but working together. Martha squeezed Jonas's hand, grateful for his wisdom. He's right, Jacob. The children need both of us, and maybe, in time, we can build something new. Not a marriage, but a family of a different sort. One where everyone has a place. Emma, who had been watching all of this with wide, confused eyes, suddenly spoke up. Can I have 2 papas? The question hung in the air, innocent and profound. Martha looked at Emma, then at Jacob, then at Jonas. I think, Martha said slowly, that yes, you can. Papa Jacob will always be your papa, but maybe Mr. Jonas can be your papa too, in a different way, if that's all right with everyone. Emma seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to playing with a stick she'd found. But the question had opened something up, had given permission for a possibility that none of the adults had been willing to voice. I need time, Jacob said finally. Time to process all of this. Time to figure out who I am now, if I'm not your husband and their primary father. Take all the time you need, Martha said. We're not going anywhere. The next few days were awkward and tense, with Jacob sleeping in the barn alongside Jonas, the 2 men circling each other like wary dogs. But slowly, gradually, things started to shift. Jacob spent time with each of the children individually, learning who they'd become in his absence. He taught Matthew how to fish in the creek behind the cabin. He helped Rebecca with her sums. He rocked Emma to sleep, singing the same lullabies he'd sung when she was a baby. And he watched Jonas with Martha, watched the way they moved around each other with an ease that spoke of genuine partnership, watched Jonas defer to Martha's judgment about the children, watched Martha smile at Jonas with a warmth she'd never shown Jacob, and slowly began to understand that what they had was something he and Martha had never achieved. One evening, about a week after his arrival, Jacob found Martha alone in the garden. Jonas had taken the children to town for supplies, giving Jacob and Martha some rare private time. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Jacob said, kneeling down to help her weed between the rows of vegetables. About us. About what you said. And you were right. I was holding on to an idea of what we were supposed to be rather than seeing what we actually were. Martha sat back on her heels. I never meant to hurt you, Jacob. I know. And I'm beginning to see that me holding on so tight was hurting everyone, including me. This past week, watching you and Jonas together, watching how he is with the kids, it's shown me what a real partnership looks like. And it's made me realize that you and I, we were good partners in our way. But we were never that. No, Martha agreed softly. We never were. Jacob pulled a weed, examined it, tossed it aside. I'm going to accept Jonas's offer. Going to find a place nearby, stay close to the children. But Martha, I need you to promise me something. What's that? Promise me you'll be happy, that you won't feel guilty about choosing joy. Because if my death, my almost death, whatever you want to call it, if it gave you a chance at real happiness, then maybe it wasn't all bad. Maybe something good came from all the pain. Martha's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Jacob. That means more than you know. And Jonas, he's a good man. He'll take care of you and the children. He already does. Jacob stood up, brushed dirt from his pants. I'm going to head into town tomorrow, see about finding some work, a place to live. But I'll be back every weekend if that's all right. Want to be a real presence in the children's lives, even if it's not the way I imagined. They'd like that. We all would. That night at supper, Jacob made an announcement. I've decided to stay in the area, going to find a place of my own, close enough to see you kids regular-like. But your mama and Mr. Jonas, they're going to be your main family. And I want you to know I'm all right with that. More than all right. Thomas looked between his father and Jonas. Really, Papa? You're not angry anymore? Oh, I'm still working through some things, but I'm not angry at you kids, and I'm learning not to be angry at your mama either. Sometimes life doesn't turn out the way we plan, and we have to be flexible enough to bend instead of breaking. Clara smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Jacob had arrived. That's very wise, Papa. Well, I've had some time to think. Jacob raised his cup in a toast. To new beginnings, to figuring things out as we go, and to family in whatever form it takes. They all raised their cups, water for the children, coffee for the adults, and drank to the uncertain future ahead. Jacob left the next morning, and the cabin felt different without the weight of his presence. Lighter somehow, as if they'd all been holding their breath and could finally exhale. Jonas moved his things back inside, and that night, for the first time, he and Martha sat together on the porch as the sun set, just the two of them. Are you sure about this? Martha asked, her hand in his, about taking on all of this chaos? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Jonas brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Martha Allen, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you always put your children first. I love how you've brought life back into this cabin, into my heart, and I want to spend whatever time God gives us building a life together. I love you too, Martha said, and saying the words out loud felt like opening a window after years of breathing stale air. I love you, and I want that life. Want to wake up beside you every morning, want to watch you teach my children, want to grow old with you right here on this porch. Jonas pulled her close, and Martha rested her head on his shoulder, feeling more at peace than she had in years. The stars were coming out, bright and infinite, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out to its mate. Mama, Claire's voice came from the doorway. Is it really okay? You and Mr. Jonas? Martha looked up at her daughter, at the hope and uncertainty in her young face. Come here, sweetheart. Clara sat down on Martha's other side, and Jonas wrapped his arm around both of them. One by one, the other children filtered out, drawn by some instinct that told them this was a moment they should be part of. Soon they were all crowded onto the porch. 7 children, 1 mother, and the man who had saved them all in more ways than one. Is Mr. Jonas going to be our new papa? Elizabeth asked. Jonas looked at Martha, silently asking permission. She nodded. If you'll have me, Jonas said. I'll never try to replace your father. Jacob will always be your papa. But if you want, I can be something like a papa too, someone who loves you and cares for you and will always be here for you. Forever? Emma asked, her thumb in her mouth. Forever, Jonas promised. Winter came to the Texas plains, bringing cold winds and hard frosts. But inside the cabin there was warmth and laughter and the sound of a family learning how to be whole again. Jacob came every Saturday, teaching the children new skills, telling them stories about their grandparents, building relationships that were different from what he'd imagined, but no less important. The town talked, of course. There was scandal in Martha's choice, in her decision to divorce Jacob and eventually marry Jonas. But Martha found she didn't care what the town thought. She'd spent too many years caring about other people's opinions, bending herself to fit what was expected rather than what was true. On a cold December morning, the preacher came to the cabin and married Martha and Jonas in a simple ceremony with only the children as witnesses. Jacob was there too, standing in the back, and when Martha caught his eye, he nodded once. Permission, maybe. Or blessing. Or just acceptance of what was. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said, and Jonas kissed Martha like she was precious, like she was everything he'd ever wanted. The children cheered and Emma threw dried flower petals in the air, and for a moment everything was perfect. That evening, after the children were asleep, Jonas and Martha stood at the window looking out at the stars. "Are you happy?" Jonas asked. Martha thought about the question, about everything that had led her to this moment. The loss and the grief, the storm that had nearly killed her, the man who had saved her life and stolen her heart. She thought about Jacob and the life they'd built together, and the new life she was building with Jonas. She thought about her 7 children, sleeping peacefully in a home that was finally, truly theirs. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm happy. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm genuinely, completely happy." Jonas pulled her close, and Martha melted into his embrace. "Love isn't a fire that burns fast," she said, remembering a conversation from months ago. "It's what keeps you warm when the storm's long gone." "Is that what this is?" Jonas asked. "The kind of love that lasts?" Martha looked up at him, at this man who had given her everything without asking for anything in return. "Yes, I think it is." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the world in white. But inside the cabin, it was warm. Inside there was family and love and the quiet joy of knowing that sometimes, even after everything falls apart, there's a chance to build something new, something better. And under that wide Texas sky, in a cabin that had once been filled with silence and grief, 7 children slept safe and warm, with 2 people who loved them watching over. Martha Walker, no longer Allen, stood in her husband's arms and thought about all the ways life had surprised her, about how the worst storm of her life had led her to the greatest happiness she'd ever known. She thought about Jacob, who was learning to be a different kind of father, about her children, who were learning that family could take many forms, about Jonas, who had been given a second chance at the life he'd lost and was determined not to waste a single moment of it. "Thank you," Martha whispered. "For what?" "For finding us in that storm, for not riding away, for giving us a home." Jonas kissed the top of her head. "You gave me a home too. You and those 7 miracles sleeping in there. You brought me back to life, Martha, and I promise you, I'll spend every day proving I deserve the gift you've given me." No one shivered in the rain anymore. No one went hungry or scared or alone. They had found each other, this patchwork family, and they had chosen to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. And that, Martha thought as she drifted off to sleep in Jonas's arms, was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. It was everything.